Welcome back into the Chris Mathis podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mathis. L Savage Spence back in the house again as we're going to talk about the 2022 NFL draft from over the weekend. It was a long draft, 3 days, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And I know that you guys do not want to sit here for an hour and a half to hear about a draft recap as we talk about this draft and our favorite picks, the worst picks. Also talk about the 5 worst NFL drafts for teams. The best 5 NFL drafts over the weekend as well. And then we'll even talk about the Buccaneers and even some undrafted free agents that have either been signed and are still available that we'll dive into here momentarily. But first and foremost, I think we have to start off with bad news first, just like with all things in life. And here are my 5 worst NFL drafts from over the weekend. I'm going to go the worst. Chicago Bears, both of their top picks were defensive players they didn't protect. Quarterback Justin Fields until round number 5. So their top 2 players selected, defensive players. Justin Fields said he wasn't comfortable in last year's offense and didn't feel like he was protected. And then they go with their first offensive lineman in the 5th round of the draft. So the Bears are my worst draft of this year. Number 2, Cleveland Browns. They traded back to rack up 9 total draft picks in this draft over the weekend. They drafted a defensive back, defensive end, and a wide receiver in the 3rd round. You know, that's whatever. They, of course, have Deshaun Watson at quarterback now, but they also drafted a kicker in the 4th round of this draft where they had other holes to fill. David Njoku, not a great tight end. Maybe they could have found a tight end there instead of a kicker. Instead, they go DB, defensive end, wide receiver, which they probably needed 2 top wide receivers, in my opinion, especially after OBJ left. And then they took a kicker in the 4th round. Miami Dolphins, my 3rd worst draft, as they took a linebacker there in the 4th round, and they call him special team talent. He's a guy out of Georgia by the name of Channing Tindall. They expect him to be a special teamer right away and hopefully get some playing time due to his sideline-to-sideline speed. But to take a linebacker that's going to be a special teamer first with your first pick, 4th round pick, and then draft a wide receiver with their 2nd overall pick in the 4th round after giving up the house for Tyreek Hill. I think that was a terrible decision there by the Miami Dolphins. They're my 3rd worst team of this 2022 NFL draft. Green Bay Packers once more piss off Aaron Rodgers. They did not draft a wide receiver until later in their draft. I believe 4th round, if I'm not mistaken. May have been 3rd, but no wide receiver in the 1st round. Once more, they moved up to take a guy by the name of Christian Watson, a wide receiver who had 16 drops, one of the most dropping wide receivers in the league, least consistent wide receivers in college football over his 4-year career. But they like his potential. If he can get rid of his drops, he might be a physical target there for Aaron Rodgers. And I know Aaron Rodgers wants this guy to get on track because he's ticked off that they got rid of Devontae Adams, traded him to the Raiders, and then they did not take a wide receiver in the 1st round once more. And the New England Patriots took the biggest leap of the draft and of the 1st round for sure, and arguably the draft, as they took a offensive lineman out of UT Chattanooga by the name of Cole Strange at pick number 29. Also took a wide receiver at number 50, and that wide receiver was not even in the top 120 on the draft board, according to Bleacher Report. So the Patriots, I hope that this guy named Cole Strange works out. I like the guy. I think it's pretty cool that he came from a small school. But the Patriots did not have a great draft, in my opinion. And with that, we bring on our draft expert, Spencer, to toss out his 5 worst drafts over the weekend, Spence, and go in sequential order from worst to 5th worst.
I'm going to go from 5th worst to best to the worst. So my 5th worst draft was the Chicago Bears. They drafted a corner with their first pick. Then they went safety. They finally went receiver at the end of the 2nd round, beginning of the 3rd round. I think it was the 10th pick of the 3rd round. And they drafted a guy that I'll go into further as one of my worst picks in the draft in Velus Jones. My 4th worst pick, my 4th worst drafting team were the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I feel like going Trayvon Walker as your number 1 overall pick over Aiden Hutchinson is not the move for me. I mean, Trayvon Walker had 6.5 sacks last year at Georgia, And then they followed that up with Devin Lloyd. And then they drafted Chad Muma right after that. So that's 2 linebackers that play outside back-to-back in your second and third round. My third worst draft was the Arizona Cardinals drafting a tight end as their first selection, and Trey McBride. McBride's a great tight end. I do think that, but they had just signed Zach Ertz to a 3-year deal, so he's there for 3 more years at the end of his prime. And then they went with a defensive end and Cameron Thomas, Maya Sanders as an edge defender, and then a running back following that. I just feel like they didn't get any big splash name players, even though they had a second-round pick and 2/3. They didn't get anybody that was off the charts in terms of their athleticism. My fourth worst draft, or my second worst draft, was the Washington Commanders. They drafted Jahan Dotson, which was a bit of a reach within the top 20 picks, and then they went with a defensive tackle, and then they got another running back to pair with Antonio Gibson, who should be the primary guy, but they drafted a running back in the third round, and they finished off their fourth round with a safety. Just not a lot of good big name players there, but I do like Fedarian Mathis, the defensive tackle they selected. That was their best selection, but Jahan Dotson at 18 was a bit of a reach for me, or in the top 20, excuse me. And my least favorite draft is the same as yours, the New England Patriots. They seem to always value players higher than what they should be. Cole Strange was a projected end of the second round, beginning of the third round. They picked him at the very end of the first round, a guard out of Tennessee, Chattanooga. They ended up going with Tyquan Thornton, a receiver following that. Mac Jones, he needs weapons, but I feel like if they really wanted a weapon, they could have traded up and gotten the Patriots one of the top guys instead of going a guard in the first round that they could have selected in the second or third round. They did lose Shaq Mason to the Buccaneers for a 6th-round pick. For some reason, they traded him away. So they did need to replace him with Cole Strange, but they could have waited a little bit further into the second or maybe even third round for that. And they finished their top 4 pick with a cornerback in Marcus Jones. I just feel like there's not a lot of top players in the Patriots draft profile this season. They really could have made some bigger splash choices, but it seems like Bill Belichick's the guy that likes people who are smart on the field, doesn't really care about the athleticism part of the draft, but I think he reached a lot, and he tends to do this. His drafts have been very bad over the years.
Yeah, and again, you talk about that wide receiver that they drafted. I also mentioned him as well because he was selected 50th overall by the Patriots, and Bleacher Report didn't even have the guy in the top 120 prospects in this draft right before the draft. It'd be different if, he was like a 65th best prospect or something like that, but to not even have him in the top 120 and take this guy number 50 is definitely a stretch. It's a leap, if you will. And if Sean McVay and the Rams had their scouting report properly, executed on Cole Strange, that offensive lineman that the Patriots took at number 29, Cole Strange would have still been there at 104.
Yeah.
And Sean McVay made a joke about that, was laughing that off, like, oh, wow, they took him that early. But we'll see. Again, Bill Belichick, as you said, likes those smart, high IQ football players, and maybe that's why they have so many championships there in New England. I don't know. Like you said, Mac Jones does need that protection, but I think they definitely took a leap here, and that wide receiver at number 50 was not the best choice. But the best draft we'll get into here momentarily. I'm going to start with my 5th best and work my way up to number 1 of my top 5 drafts from over the weekend. I'm going to go with Seattle Seahawks at number 5. We know that they had a dumpster fire there this past season. They lost Russell Wilson, a lot of players on the defensive side of the ball, kind of iffy. Bobby Wagner is no longer there. He's now a Ram. But this year in the draft, they took an offensive tackle, defensive end, running back, another offensive tackle, a defensive back, all in the first 4 rounds. No need to even name these players off because you look at a team that needed a complete rebuild, and they basically did that in their first 4 picks of this draft. Again, 2 offensive linemen, a running back, and then a defensive end and a cornerback as well. And we all know that it starts up front on both sides of the ball and the trenches. So no matter what, whoever their quarterback may be, even if that is Geno Smith with the Seattle Seahawks, they will have some protection there for Smith. Now, the Kansas City Chiefs, last year we joked about their defense several times right here in the podcast. They started off their draft with Trent McDuffie, a defensive back. Then they drafted a defensive end and got a great wide receiver in Sky Moore, and then took a safety, a linebacker, a cornerback, all in the first 4 rounds. Again, DB, defensive end, wide receiver, safety, linebacker, and DB all in the first 4 rounds of their draft. So Kansas City looks to really, fill some voids there for Patrick Mahomes and that high-powered offense, especially after losing a guy in Tyreek Hill. And then the Indianapolis Colts, we all know that they made a big splash move with the quarterback by the name of Matt Ryan out of Atlanta, traded one of their draft picks this year to get Matt Ryan, and they landed a wide receiver with their first overall pick, and then Jelani Woods, the tight end, a great tight end. Joe Mancuso talked about him and got to throw with him at his pro day. 6'7", I believe, right? 6'7" tight end, Jelani Woods, and then also got an offensive tackle in the 3rd round. So Matt Ryan already came into a pretty good situation with the Colts, a team that was led by Carson Wentz, nearly made it to the playoffs, and then they build around Matt Ryan even more, draft a wide receiver, a great tight end, my favorite tight end in the draft, and then an offensive tackle. So Matt Ryan is happy with what the Colts front office did, and they're my dark horse to win the AFC. I don't think that they necessarily do it, but I think that if I was a betting man on a dark horse to win the AFC, it would be the Indianapolis Colts. New York Giants, my second best draft. They took Thibodeau out of Oregon, the defensive end, phenomenal player, and then at number 5. And then at number 7 took an offensive tackle out of Alabama, Evan Neal, who's like 6'7", 320-something. He dropped 15 pounds this offseason to get some speed and be ready for the NFL. Again, 6'7", played for the best football team, second best football team in the SEC with Alabama, was dominant in all facets of the game. And they're going to protect Daniel Jones. Whether or not Daniel Jones is the quarterback of the future for the Giants, we'll find out. But they take a defensive end, offensive tackle with their first 2 picks at picks 5 and number 7. And that's why the Giants are my second best draft in this 2022 NFL draft. My number 1 goes out to the New York Jets. They play at the same stadium. The Jets took a defensive back in Sauce Gardner, who claimed months before the draft that he is the best defensive back in this draft. They took a wide receiver and a defensive end all in the first round, and then also took a running back in the 2nd round, which was a bit of a leap in my mind, but he's still a great running back. I think he'll do good things there with the Jets. Zach Wilson has to feel confident heading into year 2. And again, I think the Jets, they're going to creep up 8-9 wins easy on this season if these guys pan out and let's say 3 or 4 of their top draft picks are full-time starters right away.
Yeah, so my top 5 NFL draft teams from 5 to number 1. Number 5, I've got one that may shock the listeners. The Atlanta Falcons, I feel like, had a very strong draft. They got Drake London as their number 1 selection. He may have not been the best receiver in this draft, but for a team that needed an outside receiver, Drake London was a great choice. Better to go with him than someone like Jamison Williams, who's more of an inside guy. So I think that was a great choice for Atlanta. Then they followed that with Arnold Ebiketie, defensive end. Followed him with a linebacker out of Montana State and Troy Anderson. And then their final draft pick of the 3rd round was Desmond Ritter. I think that was a pretty good choice. He's a quarterback that knows how to play the game. He's not going to wow you with athleticism or arm talent, but he's a smart quarterback, and sitting behind Mariota for a year will be good for him. He may end up winning the job over training camp. So I think that's a good choice for the Falcons. My number 4 team, the Tennessee Titans. I liked how they traded A.J. Brown for a 1st-round pick, and they immediately filled the need. A.J. Brown got a 4-year, $100 million contract that would have just sent the Titans back a couple of years, and they needed a quarterback later in the draft, which they did address. So they saved money, got a receiver in Treylon Burks, who his NFL comparison was A.J. Brown, so a great guy to replace A.J. Brown with. Then they went with Roger McCreary, a cornerback who was a top 5 cornerback in this draft. And then they followed that with Malik Willis, trading up at the end of the 3rd round for Malik Willis. He fell very far down. I think Malik Willis is a good quarterback. He's definitely not a year 1 starter. Tannehill is a starter this year regardless. It's not like the Desmond Ritter situation where Ritter has an opportunity to maybe get the starting job over Mariota. I think that you sit Malik Willis for a year or 2 behind Tannehill and you're set. So I like the Tennessee Titans as my number 4 overall team. Number 3, I've got the Philadelphia Eagles. Started off with Jordan Davis, the big defensive tackle out of Georgia. Followed that with a guard and Cam Jurgens, who's going to move over to center whenever Kelsey retires for the Eagles. Nakobi Dean, picking him up in the third round, was probably the best selection in the entire draft. Nakobi Dean, a very phenomenal linebacker at Georgia. The reason he did drop, he's got short arms and he's got a lot of injury problems, but he should be cleared to go for the start of the 2022 season. So I do like the Philadelphia Eagles draft. Number 2, I've got the New York Jets. Sauce Gardner, first overall. Then you go Garrett Wilson as your receiver, second overall. And then pick number 26, they somehow snagged Jermaine Johnson, the defensive end out of FSU, who fell all the way to pick 26 in the first round. So that's 3 top 10 prospects in this draft drafted in the first round for the Jets. And then their 4th pick of the draft was Breece Hall. And I think Breece Hall is a great running back, so I do like that. They'll pair him with Michael Carter and Zach Wilson in that New York Jets backfield. That should be pretty dangerous. My number 1 overall team is the Baltimore Ravens. They drafted a safety in Kyle Hamilton, who is he's a Jamal Adams type safety. He's not going to be able to play over the top. He's probably going to be blitzing a lot, but he's definitely better in coverage than Jamal Adams is. So a really good first overall selection. They followed that with Tyler Linderbaum, probably the best center in this entire draft out of Notre Dame. And then followed that pick with David Ajabo, who was a projected top 10 pick going into the 2021 college season before he got injured near the end of the season. He ended up falling to pick number 45. And their final pick of their first 4 rounds was Travis Jones, who fell all the way to the very start of the 4th round, which was huge for the Baltimore Ravens. He's going to fit perfectly for Baltimore, and that defense is going to be great.
Yeah, again, we're talking about the 2022 NFL Draft right here on the Chris Mathis podcast. Chris and Spencer Mathis breaking down a very long weekend for all of you football fans, and I waited all the way through round 7 for good reason. We'll talk more about that here in the next couple of segments, but we want to talk about our best 3 picks, and by best 3, I weighed in maybe best situation, where they picked this guy overall. And I think that's going to be cool to talk about. And then we'll talk about our 3 worst picks in this draft as well. I don't know if I have a particular order for my top 3 picks, but I'm going to fire away with the 7th overall pick was offensive tackle Evan Neal for the New York Giants out of Alabama. I just spoke on him a few moments ago. 6'7", 337 pounds. I think I just said 315, 337 pounds. And he dropped more than 10 pounds, close to 15 pounds this offseason to get ready for that NFL speed in the trenches and hopefully lead the way for Saquon Barkley to come back and bounce back to have a great season, protect Daniel Jones. My second favorite pick, or my second best pick in this draft, defensive end Aiden Hutchinson of the Detroit Lions. Went to University of Michigan, 6'6", 474, 40-yard dash. He's got great technique, high IQ, high motor. He's got great recognition in terms of if it's a running play or a passing play, and he can play both the run and the pass. He's a very exceptional player. And on top of that, I think him being there at number 2 was a steal. As you said, the Jaguars messed up on their first overall pick. But at number 2, Aiden Hutchinson, lesser expectations than if he was to go number 1, even though it's just a 1-spot difference. Just to say, hey, I was a second overall pick is a lot more simplified and understandable than the first overall pick, less expectations rather than being the number 1 guy. But I love this pick for the Detroit Lions that need a lot of help. And he's going to go to a team with a coach that loves to bite kneecaps. So Aiden Hutchinson could be that guy for the Detroit Lions. And then my 57th overall, or my third pick that I really love, 57th overall pick was Luca Decky for Tampa Bay. 6'5", 312 pounds. And I know it's a bit biased, but he's an offensive lineman that said in a pre-draft interview, I'm not a nice guy whatsoever. I'm a straight-up glass eater out there. And how can you not love that? I mean, that gives me chills as a football fan to know that this guy just absolutely wants to dominate that defensive lineman. He has to, go up against every play. And again, went to a school not known for offensive linemen to be, a top pick like a guy out of Alabama or a school like that. But this guy is going to be a force. And I'm excited to see what Luca Decky could do for this Buccaneer offense and protect Tom Brady and help build up this rushing attack in Tampa.
Yeah, my top 3 draft picks have a lot to do with what pick they were drafted in as compared to where they were on the big draft boards. My third best pick was the Titans going with Malik Willis at pick number 86. I mean, he was a top 28 draft prospect coming into this draft on Thursday, and he ended up falling all the way to the third round, pick number 86 to the Titans. The Titans traded up. I think that was a good choice. He's going to be a developmental quarterback. You're going to have to sit him for a couple of years, maybe even just the 1 year here behind Tannehill. I think he's going to be a pretty good starting NFL quarterback eventually, especially if they can continue to have Derrick Henry absolutely tear up the league like he's done over the past couple of years. My second best pick, I'm going to go the Jets with Jermaine Johnson at pick number 26. Just the fact that he was a top 10 prospect, ended up falling all the way down to pick number 26, selected one pick before the Buccaneers were about to go, and I think that really did make the decision for them that they were going to trade out of the first round as soon as they saw Jermaine Johnson was picked. He's going to be a great outside linebacker / defensive end for the Jets. And my number one overall pick, a guy that had a lot of injury concerns coming into the draft, a projected into the first round pick, ended up falling all the way to pick number 83 in the third round. And it's Nakobi Dean. The Eagles got a great one. He was great in college because he was behind probably the best defensive line in college football history, and Jordan Davis leading the way, the big 360-pound defensive tackle that was drafted by the Philadelphia Eagles, played a big part in Nakobi Dean being a stud at Georgia. And the reason I really like this pick a lot for the Eagles, and it's my number one pick of the draft, is because the Eagles also drafted Jordan Davis, and now they're going to be paired as rookies on a great Philadelphia Eagles defense with Fletcher Cox training Jordan Davis at defensive tackle. And that linebacking core is going to be sweet as well, especially with Johnson playing at linebacker and defensive end next year. So I'm excited for that. I'm excited to see the Eagles prosper.
Yeah, I think the Eagles had a phenomenal draft. They were at first I thought they were my, top 3 or 4 draft classes of this year, drafts of this year. But then I did a little bit more research. But I love those picks there for the Philadelphia Eagles. I think they're going to be very good. And it's going to be scary if Jalen Hurts can go off this year for the Eagles. They are a serious playoff contender. And as you said, Pat Johnson there at linebacker, they added several key additions to the defensive side of the ball this offseason too. And Fletcher Cox there to help lead the way for the Eagles. And what should be a nasty defense in the NFC. Now, my worst picks in this draft, I'll start off with, going from least worst to the absolute worst pick in the draft. And I'm going to go with pick number 124. It's a 4th-round pick, kicker Cade York of LSU to the Browns. Why not get another weapon for Deshaun Watson? Instead of taking a kicker so early, why not help Deshaun Watson's case out there in Cleveland or help build up that defensive side of the ball? I think a specialist that early is a joke, especially in a draft like this year. Again, I don't think outside the top 20, 25 picks there was any big-name splash-type players. I do think there was a lot of good players, but not like a great marquee name.
Yeah, and this was a bit of a weird draft with kickers and punters going in the top 4 rounds for some reason.
Yeah, it's almost like the coach and the GMs, they read the scouting reports and kind of the overall draft overview and said, you know what, this draft's kind of weak. And they kind of just roll with that. Let's get a specialist in the top 4 rounds of this draft, which is ridiculous. But Cade York to the Browns, that was a bad pick. At pick number 125, just one pick later, the Miami Dolphins took a wide receiver by the name of Eric Yuzukanama. Either way, I think that was a bad pick. They've got Jalen Waddle. They just traded an arm and a leg for Tyreek Hill. They traded all these picks to get a top wide receiver and then pay some money for Tyreek Hill. And they draft a wide receiver with their second pick in this draft. I think that was ridiculous. And I think they needed more help on the defensive side of the ball. Maybe go running back in Miami. They did not do that, did not even address that running back position in this draft to help out Tua. And then I like the guy. I think it's a cool story, and I think that there's potential here. I hope he does work out for the Patriots, and he possibly could. But in terms of where he was projected to where he was taken at number 29 overall, Cole Strange was the worst pick in this draft for the New England Patriots.
Yeah, Cole Strange was my 3rd worst pick in this draft, just off of the exact same reasons that you said. He was projected at like 80th overall on most of the big boards that teams had. Ended up going to the Patriots at 29, who do value offensive linemen higher than most teams do, which was, I don't know, I feel like they do reach a lot. I think he was a consensus 77th draft selection choice was where people projected him to go. My second worst draft pick was Wan'Dale Robinson, the wide receiver from Kentucky, going to the New York Football Giants. They have Kadarius Toney. They were supposedly going to move him. This guy is the exact same player as Kadarius Toney with a little bit of a better skill set, but their first two picks were great. I love their first two picks in Thibodeaux and the offensive lineman, but following that at pick number 43, the 11th pick in the second round, with a receiver that you didn't need. They should have gone with a bigger receiver. They need an outside receiver because Kenny Golladay did not work in New York. He's still there, but they do need another outside receiver to pair with him. So that's my second worst pick. And my overall worst pick in this entire draft is the Bears waiting until the third round to draft Velus Jones at pick number 71. He ran a 4.31 40, which is great. The guy's going to be 25 at the start of next season, almost 26. Okay, so he's already a bit older than all of the other players. His best season in college was last year. He put up 800 yards and 6 touchdowns. I just think that this guy was way overdrafted, and NFL teams constantly had him at pick number 150 to 200, and the Bears drafted him 71st overall.
Yeah, it really adds up for the Chicago Bears. It seems to be a trend that the bad teams that always suck, you look at their drafts, and it adds up. The blueprint is there. The execution of their strategizing plan is there, and it's just terrible. And again, the Bears did not even help out Justin Fields until I believe the 5th round with an offensive tackle. So
they were a team that had to go receiver early on, and they did not. They didn't address it till the 3rd round and got a guy that is a projected return man coming into the draft. So,
yeah, and again, that wide receiver, Allen Robinson's gone. They didn't bring him back. They're in trouble. The Bears are in trouble. And another bad draft just tacks on. Before we talk about some undrafted free agents that could be signed as of right now and or are waiting on an opportunity, let's talk about our Buccaneers, Spence, and I'll let you kind of lead the way here. Briefly talking about the Buccaneers draft, I thought they had a pretty solid draft. I liked that they were really spread out. It was various in terms of what positions and what needs they filled. I love the pick at lineman, 57th overall, Luca Decky. I talked about him being one of my top 3 picks in this draft. And then obviously addressing that defensive line opening with Ndamukong Suh no longer being a Buccaneer. It seems to be that way. If they're going to take a defensive lineman in the 2nd round with their first pick in the draft, Suh is yet to re-sign. And then they get a running back as well in that 3rd round, add to the tight ends room after we're still awaiting Rob Gronkowski to see if he returns. I think he does, but O.J. Howard left and he signed with the Buffalo Bills. There is some depth issue there at tight end. The Bucs feel like they addressed that. Spence, talk about this Buccaneers draft, and they did take 2 tight ends, and they also drafted a punter from Georgia in round number 4. And I just roasted the Browns for taking a kicker there in the 4th round.
Yeah, the Bucs did need to draft a punter, and there was a run on punters whenever the Bucs came up to select in the 4th round. This was a draft of runs. A lot of position groups, skill groups went in rows in the 1st round. You saw receivers go 4 picks in a row. You saw a run on corners in the late 20s. So I think the Buccaneers had to draft a punter in the 4th or 5th round, and they ended up getting their guy out of Georgia, who was the SEC Special Teamer of the Year last year in Jake Camarda. I think he's going to be a pretty good punter for Tampa Bay. Like you said, maybe a bit too high for a punter, but I did love the Buccaneers' first 4 picks of this draft, and especially their number 6 pick in this draft. My favorite pick out of this entire draft for Tampa Bay was going with Logan Hall at the front end of the 2nd round. We traded back from pick 27 to 33. I think it was a good choice. Logan Hall is a guy out of Houston that's going to replace Ndamukong Suh. And even if we do sign Suh, he will be a starter next year whenever the Buccaneers ultimately are going to get rid of William Golston. So a good replacement there. They ended up going Luca Decky in the 2nd round for Tampa Bay. They had to address the need at left guard. Alex Kappa left the Buccaneers this season. We got right guard. We've got the right guard situation fixed with Shaq Mason trading for him in the offseason, but you did need a left guard in Luke Goedeke. He played right tackle in college, but he's a guy that can move around the offensive line and compete at the left guard position for Tampa Bay. Rachaad White, a running back out of Arizona State. I do love the pick for the Buccaneers. He's a guy that after watching a couple of his all-22 tapes, I feel like he runs a lot like Le'Veon Bell. He is a bit of a stiff runner. He does run a little bit too straight at times, but his balance is probably the best in the entire draft. And a lot of teams had him at a late second-round grade. So getting him in the third round, I think, was a good choice for Tampa Bay. Leonard Fournette was re-signed, but our number 2 running back other than Fournette would be Keyshawn Vaughn. And I don't believe in Vaughn very much.
Giovanni Bernard didn't pan out.
Yeah. The next pick, Cade Otton. His NFL comparison was Cameron Brate coming into the draft, and I did like Cameron Brate when he was a bit younger. This guy can block a little bit better than Cameron Brate can. Brate is not a guy that's going to get down and dirty. Cade Otton out of Washington, underutilized at Washington, didn't have a lot of yards or touchdowns, but I think he's going to be a very good tight end for Tampa Bay. And Rob Gronkowski, we don't know if he's coming back or not next season, and he could be the Buccaneers starter. And then their 6th pick in this draft, cornerback Zion McCollum, who ranked a 10 on the RAS score, the best cornerback in NFL history on the relative athletic score. You can see it on your screen now. Ran a 4.33 40-yard dash. He's 6'2". His arm length is 30.75. He weighs 199. The thing about him that a lot of scouts didn't like is he's not a very physical guy. He also came from a small college at Sam Houston State. But this is a guy who's going to probably be a 4th cornerback for Tampa coming into the offseason and hopefully work his way up and maybe end up taking the slot corner role from Sean Murphy-Bunting as the season progresses. So this Buccaneers draft, at first I wasn't a huge fan, but after that McCollum pick, I think I was sold.
Yeah, and we forgot to mention Ko O'Keefe's hair. He's got beautiful locks. We want to flash this guy up here. Check out this Buccaneer tight end there in the 6th round at pick 218.
Yeah, and this guy is a guy that came into college as an offensive tackle, which is usually the complete opposite. Usually a guy will come into college from high school as a tight end, gain a little bit of weight, transition to offensive line. This guy did the complete opposite. He came in out of high school as a left tackle, ended up transitioning to tight end. He's 295 at tight end, which is absolutely insane. So this guy's going to be super fun to watch for Tampa Bay. He's not going to be catching the ball often, but in jumbo sets or in the goal line, he's going to be a really good player for Tampa Bay, maybe even lined up at fullback instead of Vita Vea from now on.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun to watch him. And as you said, the Bucs have utilized players like him in the past. Vita Vea had a couple of runs last year, and then 2 years ago had one in Atlanta. It might have been 3 years ago at this point, in which they handed it off to Vita Vea. Yep. He had a touchdown. This guy could fill that hole there and help take those reps from Vita, and also protect Vita in a way if he's going to be able to play on the offensive side of the ball. Because I love Vita, but I don't want to lose him when I can play a guy like Ko O'Keefe out of Minnesota. But there are a couple of guys that flew under the radar for various reasons, but still could be very good additions to NFL teams, undrafted free agents. And here are my top 3 undrafted free agents that may be signed with the team. I've got 2 that did sign with the team and then 1 that has not signed with the team. I'll go with my first being Nevada quarterback Carson Strong. He was signed by the Philadelphia Eagles. He was projected 4th or 5th round and somehow just kept falling in the draft, eventually going undrafted. Scouts raved over his leadership skills and his killer instinct at quarterback. But, of course, he is a bit slower. He's had some leg issues. He's had some serious surgeries on his leg, but still put up big numbers. He's not very athletic. And, of course, having a leg that's been operated on a couple of times, you're not able to get away. But in terms of throwing the football, this guy finished with over 4,000 passing yards in his final season at Nevada, 36 pass touchdowns, 8 picks, combined over the last 2 seasons for 63 tutties, 12 interceptions just in the last 2 seasons at Nevada. It's a pretty decent-sized school, and I think he's going to be decent there as a quarterback 3 for the Philadelphia Eagles. I think that they just got a guy undrafted who could be on their 53-man roster. My second favorite undrafted free agent that signed with the New York Jets is Bam Knight. He played running back at South Carolina or NC State. My bad right there. NC State first team all ACC honors. Had 3 kickoff returns in his last 2 seasons. So undrafted guy comes in, can be a great special teamer right away. He's 6 foot tall, 190 pounds, and averaged 5 yards per carry in his collegiate football career. Guy's great. He was projected to be a 5th or 6th round pick as well, and he drops out of the draft, goes undrafted. From what I saw from this guy, very quick. He's got great acceleration, but kind of like the guy that you were referencing a few moments ago, kind of runs straight too often. He's very upright runner. which is good in certain situations until you have to be elusive and try to follow behind blocks, and then it could be an issue. But for going undrafted, great job here. And then Joe Mancuso, quarterback out of Richmond, is my third favorite undrafted free agent. He is currently not signed. The signal caller put up big numbers at Richmond. 59 total touchdowns, over 7,000 total yards, fifth in school history, and nearly 6,000 passing yards, sixth in school history, over 1,500 yards rushing for a quarterback that's listed at 6'5", 6'6", or correction, 6'3", 220, something like that. And he's a great friend of mine, and I think he's going to be a great addition to any NFL team that wants to take a shot on Joseph Mancuso. He's been on the podcast. If any scout out there is watching this right now, just go check out our last podcast interview with the guy. You'll see what he's all about. Joe Mancuso out of Richmond. And it's not a matter of if he gets signed, it's a matter of when he gets signed. And that'll be here within the next month, if I had to guess.
Yeah, my third best UDFA available is Joe Mancuso, like you just said, for the exact same reasons. I do love Joe Mancuso. I love his work ethic. I love his skill set. Being able to run at his size is very fun to watch. I think he's a guy that can escape out of the pocket, make the throws when needed. I think any NFL team will be lucky to sign him. My second best UDFA that was signed, same as yours, Carson Strong. This guy, a great college quarterback, 60 touchdowns over the last 2 seasons for him, which led all of FBS. He was a stud at Nevada. He had multiple knee surgeries on his right knees, and one AFC scout compared his mobility to Phillip Rivers in his last season. So that's the reason he fell so far. He has no mobility. He can't escape the pocket. He literally does. He hasn't had a season in his entire career with over 1 rushing yard in college.
Okay, yeah, so that's why he dropped. But in terms of just being a pure pocket passer, he's pretty good. He can he can toss that rock around like it's a kid in a candy store trying to grab all that candy up.
Yeah, but you have to have mobility in the NFL. You're going to get moved off the spot. He ended up signing with the Eagles. He'll be a career backup. I don't know if he's really going to make it in the NFL for long with the knee injuries that he has. My number one overall UDFA still available is Justin Ross out of Clemson, a guy that whenever he was a freshman, whenever Clemson was on that the ACC title run, they ended up winning the national championship with Trevor Lawrence at quarterback. He put up 1,000 yards that season and absolutely toasted Patrick Surtain Jr. in the college football championship. And since then, it was found out that he had a spinal problem that he was born with. So that's definitely going to affect him being drafted. He's been injured a lot in his career. He ended up being told that he wasn't going to be able to play football anymore. Ended up playing last season, put up nearly 600 yards, 3 touchdowns, did get injured halfway through the season, but this is a guy that NFL teams should take a chance on. I think he's a very talented receiver, and if he didn't have these back problems, he's probably a top 3 receiver in this draft. Now he's a UDFA. He still hasn't been signed 2 days after.
Yeah, that's crazy. And again, he's talented, and you look at the quarterback drop-off there after Trevor Lawrence left Clemson. Those numbers all add up. And, of course, the injuries, too, stack up for him not playing as many games as he would like to or as he did his freshman year, in which he dominated Patrick Surtain. But again, these are undrafted guys that is, definitely worth taking a look at and maybe signing for $350,000 just to have him in the camp and see what he can do and maybe fight for a job on the practice squad or eventually a 53-man roster if somebody goes down. Why not take a shot on a guy like that was really good with a great quarterback just, 2-3 years ago?
Yeah, and I love how, as NFL fans or fans of any sports, we can say, just sign the guy for $350,000. Take a chance,
Yeah, no, that's cool. And if there is one guy I would love to see get signed for any dollar amount, it's Joe Mancuso. I hope a team takes a shot on this guy. And again, he's going to be one of those guys that is in the locker room. He's a great teammate. He's a great leader, no matter what role he has. If he has to be the greatest film room quarterback or the greatest scout team quarterback in history, he'll be able to do that and help this team out. Whatever team takes a shot on him, they'll not regret it, and that's guaranteed. But overall thoughts on the NFL draft, Spence, as we close out this episode of the Chris Mathis podcast.
I love the weirdness of this NFL draft. Seeing one quarterback taken in the first 2 rounds was absolutely comical, in my opinion. Malik Willis was a projected top 28 pick, didn't go till pick 80-something, and I think that is what made this draft so fun. And the reason that this draft waited so long for teams to get quarterbacks was because of the COVID year a couple of years ago. This is probably the most overall talent that we've ever seen in an NFL draft. And the one big position that didn't have very much talent was the quarterback position, which is funny because every season it seems to be quarterbacks leading the way. And looking at next year's draft, quarterbacks are going to be the home run selection in the 2023 draft.
The latest episode of the Chris Mathis podcast brought to you by Information on Demand Pre-Employment Background Screening Services, offering fast, accurate, affordable background screening services. Whether you need criminal background checks, drug screenings, E-Verify, academic accreditations, or other screening services, they've got you covered. You can rest easy knowing a highly trained search team will get you the information you need in just 8 hours or less. Information on Demand, fast, accurate, and affordable pre-employment background screening services. Give them a call today, 855-914-4636, or better yet, visit them at informationondemand.net. Informationondemand.net. They bring you the Chris Mathis podcast